I am 90 years old, and I spent 60 of those years being a good man, a moral man, a church man, and I missed God entirely. Not partially, not almost entirely. I know how that sounds. I know what you're thinking. How does a man sit in a pew for 6 decades and still miss the one he came to find? I'm here to tell you, it is easier than you think. It is more common than you know. And you might be doing the same thing right now and not even realize it. This is not a sermon. I am too old and too tired for sermons. This is a warning from a man who learned the hard way that being religious and knowing God are not the same thing, not even close. Let me tell you what 60 years of religion without relationship actually looks like. Before we continue, hold on to this. You're not walking this journey alone. If this message touched you, share in the comments what God means to you and let us know where you're listening from. It's beautiful to see how far these stories travel. I was in church every Sunday. Rain, snow, didn't matter. I tithed, raised my children in the faith, never cheated on my wife, never stole, never caused a scandal. If you had asked anyone in my town about my character, they would have told you I was a decent, upright, God-fearing man. And they would have believed every word they said. So did I. That was the problem. See, I had built something over those 60 years. Not a relationship, a résumé, a long, tidy list of things I did and things I didn't do. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I believed that list meant something. I believed God was keeping the same ledger I was, that the columns were balancing, that I had earned a kind of standing. I prayed every morning, near enough. But if I'm honest with you, and I am too close to the end of my life to be anything but honest, those prayers felt like talking to a wall most days. I said the words. I meant them well enough. But there was nobody home in my chest when I said them. No warmth, no answer, no sense of a hand on my shoulder. I read Scripture the same way I read the morning paper. Habit, duty, something a man like me was supposed to do. And that word supposed to, that was the engine running everything. Not love, not hunger, not a genuine need to know the living God. Just a quiet, steady sense of what a man like me was supposed to do. There is a passage in the book of Philippians where Paul lists out his own religious résumé. Everything he had done right, every mark in his favor, and then he calls all of it loss, worthless. Compared to actually knowing Christ, he says, all those achievements are nothing. I read that passage 100 times over 60 years, and every time I nodded at it the way you nod at something you think applies to other people. It never once occurred to me that it was written for me. The cruelest part of what I'm describing is how invisible it was. I was not a hypocrite in the way people use that word. I was not pretending on the outside while sinning on the inside. I was something quieter and harder to name. I was compliant. I showed up. I performed the motions of a faithful man without ever pressing through to the reality behind them. People after church would talk about what God had said to them that week, what they felt, what had moved them. I smiled and nodded. Inside, I felt nothing of the kind. And rather than letting that gap trouble me, I told myself they were the excitable sort, that my faith was just more settled, more mature. Lord have mercy, I was not mature. I was numb. and I had been numb for so long I had confused it with peace. I wasn't a faithful man. I was a compliant one. And there is a world of difference between those two things. I just didn't know it yet. But here's the thing. I didn't know I was drifting. That's the cruelest part. I told myself for decades that I would go deeper with God when things slowed down. When the kids were grown, when the mortgage was paid, when work wasn't so consuming, when I had more time and less weight on my shoulders, then I would really seek Him. Then I would do more than go through the motions. Then I would press in, as the old folks used to say. I just needed a little more time first. That is the trap, right there, that word, someday. I used it the same way I used it on everything else I didn't want to face. Someday I'll get that checked out by a doctor. Someday he'll have that hard conversation with my son. Someday he'll stop and be still long enough to ask whether any of this actually means what I say it means. Someday is where we put the things that matter most when we're too comfortable to deal with them today. And the terrible thing about a comfortable life is that it gives you just enough to keep you from hunger. I had a good home, a steady income, a wife I loved, children who turned out decent. I had enough, and enough, I have learned, is the enemy of everything deeper. When a man is not desperate, he does not seek. He maintains, he manages, he shows up on Sunday and files it away and goes back to his life. There were moments when God knocked. I can see them now, looking back. A friend died young, and I sat at the graveside and felt something crack open in me. A cold, real question rising up. Is any of this true? Do I actually believe what I say I believe? I felt it for 3, maybe 4 days. And then life filled back in around it. Work, routine, the noise of a full house. And I let that question go unanswered because answering it honestly would have cost me something. That is what the book of Ecclesiastes is talking about when it says vanity of vanities. Not just that life is brief, that we fill it with things that feel urgent and turn out to be empty. The busyness felt real. The providing felt real. The calendar, the obligations, the 1,000 small tasks of a responsible life, all of it felt like it mattered, and much of it did matter. But I used it. I used it as a reason not to stop, not to get quiet, not to sit in that empty room with the question I was afraid to ask. There was a loneliness underneath all of it that no amount of moral uprightness could fix. I did not have a name for it for a long time. I thought it was just the nature of getting older, the quietness that settles over a man when his hair goes gray. But it won't age. It was distance, the slow, accumulated distance of a man who had never once stopped performing long enough to be real. I thought showing up to church was the same as showing up to God. It is not, not even close. One is a habit, the other is a surrender. And I had spent 60 years perfecting the habit while avoiding the surrender completely. Every week, every year, every someday that never came. And then the night came when I couldn't run any more. It was a Tuesday. I remember that because there was nothing special about it. No anniversary, no crisis. Just a Tuesday in late winter, 2 in the morning, and I was lying in the dark, wide awake, the way old men do. My wife was asleep. The house was still, and the silence came at me like something with weight. I had been having more of those nights, nights where the quiet got loud, where there was nothing left to busy myself with and nowhere left to go inside my own head except toward the thing I had been stepping around for 60 years. The question I had let close back up at that graveside decades before, the one I had drowned in routine and responsibility and the thousand small tasks of a life well managed. That night it would not close. I got up. I went to the chair by the window. I had a Bible on the table beside it, the same one I had read from for years, worn at the spine, familiar as an old coat. I opened it the way I always had, not searching, just reaching for the habit. I don't know why I landed where I did. I can't explain it except to say that something pulled, and I found myself reading Luke chapter 23, the crucifixion, a passage I had read so many times the words had gone smooth, like river stones you stop noticing because you've handled them so long. But that night the words were not smooth. Come into your kingdom. That is all he come into your kingdom. That is all he says. He has no sum, no church record, no decades of faithful attendance, no tithes logged, no children raised in the faith, no ledger with his name on it. He is a man at the absolute end, with nothing to offer, making the only honest request he knows how to make. And the answer comes back. Today you will be with me, not some day, not when you've done enough, not after a period of probation to make up for the years you wasted. Today. I sat in that chair, and something broke open in my chest, not loudly. It wasn't like a thunderclap. It was more like a seam giving way, a slow, deep tearing. Because it hit me, for the first time in 60 years of reading that story, that God was not impressed by my résumé. He had never been waiting for the résumé. He had been waiting for exactly what that man on the cross gave him. One honest moment, one real admission of need. Nothing performed, nothing managed. Just a man stripped of everything, finally telling the truth. I had spent 60 years giving God the performance, the attendance, the compliance, the tidy, respectable, well-maintained exterior of a man who had his life in order. And the whole time, the thing he was after was the one thing I had never once given him, the real thing, the unguarded thing, the part of me that was actually afraid and actually lonely and actually did not know, if I am being fully honest, whether I had ever truly believed any of it or just gone through the motions so long that belief and habit had blurred into one. That night I wept, not politely, not the way a settled, mature man of faith weeps, like a child, like a man who has just understood something enormous and terrible and too late, and somehow, impossibly, not too late all at once. The grief was not fear of hell. I want to be clear about that. It was sorrow, clean, deep sorrow over 60 years of distance that did not have to be, over a closeness I could have had and chose without knowing I was choosing, to defer, some day, later, when things slow down. That is what I felt in that room. That is what I believe happened in that chair by the window on a Tuesday in late winter, with the house quiet and my Bible open and 60 years finally catching up to me. That night I stopped performing, and I started talking to him like he was actually there. The first morning after that night I talked to him out loud. Not formal words, not the kind of language I had used for 60 years, the careful, measured phrases of a man reciting something he had memorized long ago. I just talked, sitting in that same chair, the gray winter light coming through the window, and I said out loud, I don't know if I ever really knew you, and am sorry, and I'm here now, whatever that's worth at this point. That was it. That was the whole prayer. And something happened that I cannot fully explain to you. Not a voice, not a vision, nothing dramatic. Just a stillness that felt different from the empty stillness I had known before. The way a room feels different when someone walks into it, even before you turn around and see them. A presence, a warmth in my chest where there had been cold for longer than I could remember. I felt, for the first time in my life, like I was actually talking to someone who was listening. That sounds so simple. I know it does. But, child, when you have spent 60 years talking to a wall, and then suddenly the wall is gone, and there is a face behind it, simple is not the word that comes to mind. Overwhelming is closer. Shattering, maybe. The old prayer life was formal, obligatory. I came with my list of requests the way you'd come to an office with paperwork. I filled out the form, I submitted it, I left. What it became after that night was nothing like that. It became conversation, ragged and plain, and sometimes just sitting in the quiet and saying, "I'm here. I don't know what to say today, but I'm here." I started reading Scripture differently, too. Not like a checklist, like a letter, like something written for me specifically by someone who already knew every room in my house. That passage in John where it says, "The sheep know the shepherd's voice." I had read it for decades as a general truth, something that applied to believers in the abstract. That winter morning I read it and understood for the first time that I had never been still long enough to hear anything. You cannot hear a voice you are always too busy to listen for. Now, I don't waste a morning. That is not guilt talking. That is clarity. When you finally know what you were missing, you stop treating it like it can wait. And I want to say something to you directly here, because I think some of you know exactly what I am describing. That loneliness I told you about, the one underneath all the performance, the one that moral uprightness couldn't touch. Maybe you've felt it too. Maybe you have your own arsum, your own long list of things you did right, and you still go to bed at night with that hollow feeling you can't quite name. You are not broken. You are just hungry. And you have been trying to feed that hunger with everything except the one thing that can actually satisfy it. Susan, in that other story, she didn't want to be taken to Scotland out of obligation. She wanted her husband to want to be with her. God is not so different. He was never asking for your attendance record. He was asking for you. The real you, the afraid, tired, honest you. That is the one He's been waiting for all along. Stop mistaking activity for intimacy. That is the first thing I would tell my younger self. Stop filling every hour with the noise of a responsible life and calling it devotion. Stop saving God for the hard moments, the hospital rooms, the gravesides, the 2 in the morning when the silence finally gets loud enough to hear. He was never meant to be your emergency contact. He was meant to be your daily bread. You do not need a better résumé. I want you to hear that plainly. That man on the cross had nothing. No years of faithful attendance, no tithes recorded anywhere, no children raised right, no reputation to stand on, nothing but the truth of what he was and what he needed. And that was enough. That was more than enough. So whatever you have been waiting to clean up before you come to God, stop waiting. Whatever version of yourself you have been trying to become before you feel worthy of His time, let it go. You don't come to him because you've earned it. You come because he said to come, and he said it to the thief on the cross the same as he's saying it to you right now. There is a verse in Psalm 90 that asks God to teach us to number our days. I used to read that as a verse about death, about being sobered by how short life is. But it is not really about death. It is about today. It is about stop deferring the one thing that matters while you spend your numbered days on things that don't. Teach us to number our days so we stop wasting them on the performance and start spending them on the presence. Talk to him like he's in the room, because he is, not because you've done enough to deserve it, because he said so. And if it feels strange at first, if you feel foolish sitting in a chair talking out loud to someone you cannot see, good. That feeling means you're finally being real. I felt foolish the first night. I talked anyway, and that stumbling, foolish, unpolished conversation was the most honest prayer I had offered in 60 years. You still have time. I need you to believe that. But I also need you to understand that time is not the unlimited resource you have been treating it as. I am 90 years old. I know what the end of a calendar looks like. And I'm telling you, with everything I have left in me, you have time, but not as much as you think. Don't spend another day maintaining the distance. I wasted 60 years being good, decent, compliant, moral, and I didn't have to. None of that distance was required. It was chosen slowly, quietly, without me ever fully knowing I was choosing it. But God was there the whole time, standing still while I ran, waiting behind every someday I ever deferred, not angry, not keeping score, just waiting for one real moment, one honest word. That is what he wants from you, not your record, not your reputation, not the long list of things you didn't do. Just you, the real one, the tired one, the one who lies awake at 2 in the morning wondering if any of it is true. The thief made it with nothing but the truth in his mouth. So can you. Tell me in the comments, where are you looking for peace today? And if someone in your life is tired of running, share this with them. They need to hear it while there's still time.